And so we begin our journey through Sophie's World, a novel about the history of philosophy. So the first three chapters is what I want to mention in this particular video. The first one is the Garden of Eden. And as you'll find as we go through this course or these videos, that I like Sophie's World as a teaching tool. I've used it for years as one of the textbooks for an intro to philosophy class to kind of get a sense of the history of philosophy, at least in the Western world. But I will be critical about various things. There's some aspects of his thinking that I think are just a little flat. And we find in this first chapter, the Garden of Eden, something that I personally find a little not so smart. And that is this question of where did God come from? Now, I believe in God. You may not, doesn't matter. But I would say that whether you believe in God or not, this idea, where did God come from, is a fundamental misunderstanding of what Christianity is claiming, or it doesn't have to be Christianity, could be Islam, could be Judaism, any those religions that believe in God as the creator of a universe out of nothing. There's a fundamental misunderstanding in this question, and that I do want to clarify in this video. First of all, when we say that God created the universe out of nothing, again, you don't have to believe that, but let's say for the sake of argument, that we believe in a God that created the universe out of nothing. Well, we're suggesting that there was nothing here and God created it, which means that God is not in the creation, right? God is something outside of the creation. The whole idea, where did God come from, is actually, it confuses God with the creation, because the sense that things around me come from somewhere. Everything I see around me, there are causes behind the effects. It's called the cosmological argument for the existence of God. It's the idea that in this universe, everything I see has a cause. And of course, the Big Bang Theory believes that everything began with a point, and that at some point, bam, everything expanded and exploded, into what we have now. It raises the question, why did it begin? Now, that may be a nonsensical question. Nobody knows. Stephen Hawking, mused this sort of thing. Nobody knows what the rules are for an entire universe in a point. But let's assume that God created the point and then pressed play and boom, everything was here. We are, by the very assumption of that argument, saying that God is outside of that. And we don't know what the rules for outside of that are, right? We know that the rules inside of that, we know that the rules of this creation are that everything needs to have a cause. Now, quantum mechanics may modify that slightly, and that's what Hawking suggested. For example, Hawking suggested that when you have the universe in a quantum state, who's to say that something can't come out of nothing? Now, again, it's beyond my pay grade. But what I'm suggesting is that to say that God had to have come from somewhere also simply confuses the idea of a creator that's outside of the universe with the rules of the universe. And so I find that to be a nonsensical objection to God. The idea, but he actually, in a way, Gaarder plays into it, right? He says that everything, it has to stop somewhere, and that is kind of the cosmological argument. The idea is that we believe, as scientists, or scientists believe, that there was a point of beginning. And if there's a point of beginning, it does, at least in normal experience, raise the question of, well, why did it begin? And to suggest that God is the cause, and that God is outside of the rules of causes, there's nothing incoherent about that. That's a perfectly coherent suggestion. Okay, well, that's chapter 1. Chapter 2, talks about the top hat. In chapter 2, he says that basically the capacity to wonder, philosophy is the capacity to wonder. I don't know that I would define philosophy that way necessarily. To me, philosophy is that discipline that asks what all the other disciplines are doing. So there's a philosophy of art, there's a philosophy of science, there's a philosophy of history, philosophy of knowledge, philosophy of religion, The idea that philosophy is from a, if you want to go biblical, is the pursuit of wisdom. That might be a nice definition: the pursuit of what is wise, what is wisdom, what is wise thinking, and wise practice. So those are fine definitions too. Gaarder's it's the art of wonder. He talks about this thought experiment where a child starts floating at the breakfast table, and the mother is like, "What's going on here?" But the baby's fine with it. I may not exactly have said that the way that chapter 2 puts it, but that ability to ask questions about everything is very much the heart of philosophy, and that's chapter 2. Well, chapter 3. Let's talk about chapter 3 for a second. Once again, in chapter 3, we talks about the myths. I have to take some exception to what he says. I am a biblical studies expert. That's my discipline, New Testament, and so I've certainly thought a little bit about what a myth is. And his definition of a myth is, in my opinion, quite elementary, not quite sophisticated enough. He defines a myth as a story about the gods which sets out to explain why life is as it is. He basically portrays myths as bad science. It's not a very sophisticated understanding of myths. In fact, if you look at the example he gives of the god Thor, who dresses up as a woman and then kills the guy who stole his hammer, this is a horrible explanation, right? Because how are we going to explain the changing of the seasons next year? Because you killed the guy. Is the guy going to come back to life? He's alive again. Oh, Thor, he steals the hammer again. Oh, Thor dresses up as a woman again. Thor kills him again. I mean, this is a horrible explanation. And so if you think, well, a myth is bad science, or a myth is a primitive explanation that stupid people come up with, if that's what a myth is, this boggles the imagination. How could the ancient Norse people be so stupid? And I think actually the joke is on us, because that's not what myths do. Here's a very unofficial definition of a myth. A myth is a story expressing a mystery. You can see even that the word mystery has the core of myth in it. Myths are not primarily about explaining things. Again, this is where a scientific worldview, we don't even realize we're wearing glasses. You think that they're stupid, and of course there were people that took the myths literally. Don't get me wrong. There were plenty of people in the ancient world that took the myths literally. But really, myths are expressions far more than they are explanations. Our scientific worldview makes us assume that they must be explanations, but they're far more expressions. And so what this story expresses is the changing of the seasons. Now, I still don't know that it's a great expression of the mystery. I like the Demeter, Persephone, and Hades version of the Greeks much better, where half the year she's in the underworld and half the year she's not. That actually works a lot better as an expression of the changing of the seasons than the Norse version. However, I think we are the ones who are ignorant if we're thinking of them primarily as explanations. This is a story that expresses the changing of the seasons, which was a mystery. It's not an explanation. And by the way, I used to have a colleague who says, don't tell the students that. I taught for years at a church university. And I had a colleague who says, don't use the word myth. Don't use the word myth. People don't understand it. Because as soon as you say something's a myth, they immediately say, oh, you think it's false. And I think, no, a sophisticated, okay. And if you're taking this course, I hope you're smart enough to get this distinction. When you say something is a myth, you're saying it's true in a different way. In the same way that, say, the parable of the prodigal son, there is nothing in Scripture that suggests that there ever was historically a prodigal son. You're accusing the Gospel of Luke of lying. Not at all. I'm simply saying that the truth of the parable of the prodigal son is from a different genre than historical. And so, again, there are those who would say that, for example, there are some who would say that the story of Adam and Eve is a myth. They're not saying, this is false. There never was an Adam and Eve. Now, maybe they believe there was an Adam and Eve. Maybe they don't believe that there was an Adam and Eve. But What they're saying is that the truth, the story of Adam and Eve, is found in a different way than as viewing this as a videotape, of Adam and Eve. Now, I'm not saying that Adam and Eve didn't exist. That's not my point. I'm simply saying that those who say that that is a mythical story are not saying it's a bad explanation. It's false. That's an ignorant way of understanding myth. Those who say that are saying that this is a expression of things like, why do men often dominate women? Why are women often having painful childbirth? Why do snakes not walk? Why, do men work hard in the field tilling the soil? That the story is much more of an expression of those dynamics of the ancient world than necessarily an explanation. Again, I'm not taking a position on that here. I'm simply explaining what myth is in a more sophisticated way than Gaarder seems to be aware of. So to place the emphasis on explanation is to miss the principal function of the ancient myths. It is to look at them as bad science. And there have been a lot of people who've been very condescending toward ancient myths. Oh, I'm so much smarter than those ancient Greeks. When in fact, joke's on you. You didn't understand what a myth was, did you? Here is from Finnegan a more official definition of a myth. A myth is not then, in the first instance, a fanciful tale, but it is a symbolic or poetic expression of that which is incapable of direct statement. Finnegan is an expert on myth, and so I'm going to let his definition stand. Well, this has been the first 3 chapters of Jostein Gaarder's Sophie's World.